Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Elders Climate Action May National Call. I'm Robert White here. I'm a volunteer with Elders Climate Action and a member of the Education Committee. I'm grateful for this opportunity to moderate today's call with our renowned guest, Panama Bartholomy, who I will introduce in a little bit. For those of you who are new to climate action or may not have heard about us, we always like to say that we are great uncles and great aunts, grandparents, and everyday folks who are determined to do all we can to leave a livable planet for future generations and all life. Our programs, communications, and chapters are focused on engaging elders and building the personal and political will needed to respond to the climate crisis. At ECA, we are elder-centered and volunteer-driven, seeking to inform, inspire, engage, and encourage older generations to take action on the climate crisis at the local, state, and national levels. Some of us on this call may be new to climate activism, and some of us, all of you, may have been working on it for many years. But each of us has probably faced a personal reckoning, decided that there is no better use of our wisdom and strength, our time and resources, our passion and goodwill than to join in this struggle. We believe that collective action is the most effective way to bring policy changes on the scale and timetable that will be necessary to protect all life working through all of us. And we do mean all of us in our backgrounds, abilities, origins, political persuasions, poor and rich, young and old, and most importantly, our most vulnerable. Climate change, structural racism, and injustice are all ugly byproducts of a system that values profit and property over life. We're working for an equitable generation of all of it. I'm about to introduce Panama Bartholomy of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. BDC is a valuable friend to Elders Climate Action. We've done seminars with them in the past. So you remember Chef Rochelle, she had a great cooking demonstration. She is part of Building Decarbonization Coalition. So now I'm going to introduce the person you really came to hear from. Panama is the founder and executive director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, a multi-sector forum advocating for and creating solutions for our pollution-intensive building stock. I have a really long resume of Panama, and I'm not going to read it all, but I just want to say he's worked a lot in local government. He's worked for private enterprise. He's worked for the Green Building Council, and he's past president of the Northern California chapter. He's served on the City of Sacramento Planning Commission and the County of Sacramento Environmental Commission. As I said, they're great friends. BDC and Panama are great friends to us. He will encourage us to forge local alliances, create successful relationships with staff and legislators at all levels, and coordinate with industry actors to establish the conditions for a smooth, equitable transition from fossil fuels, especially fossil fuels in buildings. He'll give us some useful tips, and he will offer some timely thoughts of what has been happening in the last 4 months. And I think we've all noticed quite a bit has happened in the last 4 months. After Panama's presentation for about 40 minutes or so, we will take questions, then have an action part of Climate Action Now. So Panama, welcome to Elders Climate Action, and thank you again for being our speaker today on the National Call.
Well, thank you, Robert. It's really great to be here. And thank you, Leslie, for your leadership of the organization, and Paloma and Ariana for helping with pulling this all off. It's really appreciated. As Robert said, our organization, the Building Decarbonization Coalition, or BDC, is a great friend and a big fan of Elders Climate Action. I think much of the progress that we've made over the past decade on climate change is in large part due to groups like Climate Action and others coming together and really fighting at the local and at the state level in order to make significant change that's got us to this point. So with that, I'm really honored to be here with you tonight, this afternoon, depending where you are, to talk to you about one of the pieces of climate action that hits most closely for everybody, our homes and our buildings, where we spend 90% of our time. It's more important than ever on those involved in climate action to really get to the hearts and minds of people on climate action. And when you think about where we eat, where we spend time with each other, where we sleep, where we visit with loved ones in buildings. And it's one of the key ways that we can reconnect with people in these hard times when climate action is under attack, to do work on creating safe, livable, comfortable buildings for all of us. So, as Robert said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief update. I know that you're all active on building decarbonization, on building efforts. You know about building decarbonization, you know why we're going to do it, you know what's happening. So I'm going to hopefully provide you some, I think, maybe interesting facts about some of the why, giving an update about what's happening. And it's pretty amazing what's happening in the space due to the efforts of you and us and others. And then talk about some of the bright lights that are out there, some lessons learned from the election and our path forward, and then talk about how we can be effective at city councils, boards of supervisors, state legislatures, and then, as Robert promised, let's party afterwards. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fire up the PowerPoint. I probably got 25 to 30 minutes of presentation, but I can talk real slow for Robert and we'll get it to 40 minutes and then we'll get to questions. So with that, I'm gonna share my PowerPoint. We tried this out 5 times before y'all came on, so it should work. And I'll get it started now. So, as the slide says, I'm going to be providing an update on building decarbonization. For those of you new to the phrase, I'll provide a little bit of the why, but mostly get into the what and the how for everybody. So here's a little bit of the why. You know, why do we focus in on buildings? Buildings across the country represent about 1/3 of all the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted from America. So if you're going to work on climate change, it's transportation, it's electricity generation, it's industry, it's agriculture, but buildings play a really large role. And it's really going to be important if we're going to be able to get to carbon neutrality eventually. Um, Burning natural gas in buildings is one of the primary sources of that 30% of emissions. And the burning of natural gas globally is one of the fastest growing greenhouse gas emissions in the world. As Asia seeks to decarbonize its economies, it's turning largely to natural gas and renewable energy. As we seek to get off coal around the world, and as America seeks to ship more liquefied natural gas over to Europe and Africa and other places, the burning of natural gas is one of the fastest growing contributors to global climate change right now. Um, and one of the odd things about buildings and gas is that buildings only use about 1/3 of the gas in the United States. Power generation and industry use up the other 2/3, but it's a significant part of the revenue of gas utilities. And so if you look at our efforts on climate change is to really undermine the business model of gas utilities across the United States, the main delivery agent of natural gas. Buildings are actually the soft underbelly of the coal gas utility business model. And if we're going to take action, this is a key area that undermines not only the building side of the gas industry, but also the distribution agent for power generation and for industry as well. Unfortunately, we have a pretty robust gas industry in America from an expansion standpoint. We're still adding about 1 meter a minute across America, meaning a new building hooks into the gas system and adds a meter about every minute across the United States. We're doing I think, a reasonably good job about starting to push back over the last few years, but it's a trend that we have to heavily push back on. It's an industry that's fighting for its life, just as we all that work on climate action are fighting for our and other lives as well. And so it's a pitched battle, and we're up against the most well-funded industry in the history of mankind. Um, But it's not just global emissions that are a concern when it comes to burning gas in buildings. It's also very much local emissions as well. In many of our urban areas across the country, we've done a very good job about reducing emissions from cars and reducing emissions from power plants, but we've done very little over the past few decades about reducing emissions from buildings and burning gas. And in many of our most polluted urban areas across the United States, you actually have the burning of gas representing more smog causing pollutants than all of the cars and the power plants combined. And so, if we're going to get a handle on local air quality, we have to get a handle on stopping burning gas in buildings. But even more local, right here in our own homes, the studies just continue to come out. There's a new one from Stanford just 2 weeks ago finding about the impacts of growing up with gas stoves and flaring gas out of a appliance like a gas stove in your house, and the prevalence of asthma among children who then grow into adults who were raised in homes with gas stoves, and the higher prevalence if you did grow up with a gas stove. And so we're finding out more and more information around just the dangers locally in our own homes about burning natural gas. Um, And then there's a long-term economic impact of it. Um, as I said, with gas utilities, they get two-thirds of the revenue from the building sector. And you might say, well, from the building sector, what does that mean? They get it from selling gas, right? Gas utilities are basically infrastructure companies. They get their money from laying pipe in the ground and maintaining it, and then charging all of us as ratepayers to pay off the financing that they got to lay that pipe with a healthy profit on top of it. The cost for the actual gas itself is a pass-through cost. It's a commodity cost that they generally don't add any cost to. And so it's a global market sets what we're paying for the gas, but what we're paying for the distribution, the transmission of the gas is what the utilities are making their money off of. And so the whole regulatory structure of the United States is around encouraging utilities to look for every opportunity to lay new pipe or to replace old pipe with new pipe. And the pipe we're putting in nowadays has a 60 to 80 year life. And that financing is paid off over the life of it. And so every time that we make a decision to put a new neighborhood on pipe or to replace the pipe in a neighborhood, we're not only putting steel pipe in the ground, but we're putting a long-term economic commitment from that neighborhood and all of the ratepayers from that utility to sustain the payments for the pipe in that neighborhood as well. And so it's a fiscal time bomb that we're putting down into the ground each time as we're trying to get to carbon neutrality in 20 years, 25 years, and we're putting 60-year pipe in the ground that we know we're going to have to pay off now much sooner than the end of its useful life. And so in the industry, this is called accelerated depreciation. And it basically means that we'll all be paying for this pipe about twice as fast as we expected. And so twice as high rates in order to be able to pay this off. So as we put more and more of this on the ground, this becomes more and more of an economic cliff that we're facing as well. And we have a lot of old pipe that the utilities are seeking to replace. This is a chart that maps out the age of distribution gas pipelines. So transmission is the really big pipelines that carry gas like across state lines. Distribution is what's happening in all of our neighborhoods that basically takes it from the centralized area of gas from transmission down into our little homes and into our businesses. And so this just shows the percentage of pipe that over the last few decades, how it's been, when it's been put into the ground. And the yellow is everything from 1970 and before. It's basically looking at 50 years older. That is prime right now for replacement. And everything in the blue from 1970 to 1990 is what will be coming up over the next 20 years of replacement. Our friends over at Heat an analysis of all of the known replacement coming up for pipes, and it's about $1 trillion over the next 2 decades that the gas utilities are already planning on replacing on the distribution system. $1 trillion that are going to be added to the gas ratepayers to pay off. that we know that we don't want to use any of that system in just 2 decades as well. And so we're coming to this really critical moment right now of a decision point as a society of our energy policies that we've relied on for the past 60 years are out of alignment with what we know is needed for climate change. And are we going to start to make some of the decisions to push back on the expansion or the retrenchment in the gas system in order to be able to meet our climate goals? And so the alternative is that instead of building with gas, we build homes using electricity completely. And generally, four different uses in buildings represent 95% of gas use that can all be replaced by electricity. Your furnace or your boiler or your heater, your water heater, your dryer that you dry your clothes with, and then what you use to cook with. Depending on the climate you live in, depending if you're in Minnesota or in Maine or in Florida or in California, your heater uses, somewhere between 20 to 60% of the gas you use in your building. Your water heater is usually about 20 to 30%. Again, depends how cold or moderate your climate is. Your dryer, usually about 10%. Your gas stove, usually 2 to 5% of the gas in your building. All the rest of the stuff, your gas fireplace, your heated pool, spa, your barbecue, your outdoor heaters, those sorts of things, that's minimal, usually 2%, 1% each. The big ones we're talking about here are the four you have right here. And the good news is there is readily available technology that can not only perform just as well as the gas appliances for these end uses, but actually are far superior to these end uses running off of gas. And so I'll talk about a few of those technologies now and how we're doing on it. The good news is that the movement for building electrification really started in around 2017. The recognition that we have to start to electrify these end uses. We have to start having buildings rely completely on electric energy rather than fossil fuel being pumped directly into the buildings. And as the grid gets cleaner and cleaner on those buildings and the electricity provided to those buildings will get cleaner and cleaner over time as well. So the first place that the movement started was working with local governments to say we need to stop digging the hole any deeper. We have to stop putting new pipe in the ground and expanding the gas system for new neighborhoods. And I'm happy to say that a quarter of Americans now live in a jurisdiction, either a state or a county or a city, that has adopted one of these policies saying, going forward, we're not going to have the expansion of the gas system continue in our community. All future buildings are going to be built all electric within our town, within our state. We just had the state of New York release its proposed statewide building code about a month ago to go all electric. They'll start in 2027, and that'll be the biggest state at this point that will require all electric construction. The good news is that, folks, I'm here to report we're winning. We got a really bright spot in the clean energy sector right now. This is a chart that shows the sale of gas furnaces and boilers in the black line over the last 10 years. And the vertical axis is the million units sold. And so this shows furnaces and boilers sold in the black line compared to heat pumps sold in the blue line, and heat pumps being the main alternative that we're trying to push. Heat pumps are incredibly efficient, about 2 to 4 times more efficient than your best-in-class gas furnace or gas boiler. Provides really nice, steady, even heating and cooling. And just about 2020, you can see the heat pump started to really take off. And we started to see a deep dip in furnace and boiler sales. Now you can look at 2022 to 2023 and say, Panama, what's happening there? Why do we see a dip in both heat pump sales and furnace sales and boiler sales? Well, if you'll remember, that was high interest rates and really high inflation at the time. And so that led to what the industry calls a lot more of repair rather than replacement. People were saying, I'm not going to spend $15,000 to get a new furnace. I'm just going to go ahead and repair it. But we're back out of those times in 2020, 2023 to 2024 and into 2025, and you started to see an uptick in sales again, people replacing rather than repairing. And the good news is that out of that, we saw heat pumps rebound at a much higher rate than gas furnaces and boilers. And what it shows is that this is a sticky transition. We're actually seeing that the change is now being made in this market, and you're seeing a lot more sales of heat pumps than you are of furnaces and boilers. And the amazing thing is, we're one of the few places in the world where this is happening. You think of leadership happening all over Europe, perhaps in China, other places on climate action. Well, this sector right here, buildings, we're now one of the leaders in this sector. Here's the United States right here, one of only 10 countries in the world where heat pumps are outselling fossil fuel alternatives for heating. And no offense to all of the other countries, the European nations, Canada up here, but if you combine the households of all those other 9 countries together, we have twice the number of households as those countries. We have twice the population of those other countries combined. And so the market impact of our leadership in this area and the fact that we have just a few short years, because of the efforts of groups like Climate Action and others, have vaulted into this leadership position, has a huge global influence. And it's one where people around the world are looking to us right now for real motivation and inspiration about how America is actually doing this and transforming this market. So it's something we can all, I think, really be proud of our efforts. This is a little bit of a complicated topic, but I wanted to bring it to you because you see a lot of chatter online about this. A lot of people are really upset anytime you put in an air conditioner, just a one-way air conditioner, because they look at that as a lost opportunity to put in a heat pump. Um, a heat pump costs about the same as a centrally ducted air conditioning system. But the benefit is that heat pump can do most all of your heating too. It can usually cover 90% of your heating. So you're just replacing your air conditioning and you're accidentally offsetting 90% of all the emissions from your heating as well if you put in a heat pump instead. And so there's a lot of people in our movement that say what we should really be focusing on is air conditioners, not heating. And that every time you put in a dumb air conditioner, a fairy dies or something like that. Well, the good news is we're actually eating into the air conditioning share as well. And what this shows is that back in 2015 to 2017, we were selling about twice as many air conditioners as we were heat pumps. But up till last year, that's down to only 35%. And so we're actually eating into the dumb air conditioner market as well by having more and more heat pumps being installed rather than air conditioners. And so we're, oops, accidentally cutting down on 90% of the emissions in those homes that are putting in heat pumps instead of air conditioners. Only 2 more of these graphs, I promise you. Um, we're also seeing this for water heaters. Um, Energy Star heat pump water heaters, again, is an up and to the right that we're seeing. And largely, you can see the growth of it starting right around the time of this movement around building electrification happening as well. This shows those heat pump water heaters, an incredibly efficient way to heat water using a heat pump, about 4 times more efficient than your best in class tankless water heater, even. Um, Sales going up, all the way up to around 180,000 in 2023. Now, if you know this space, you know that we actually sell upwards of around 9 million units every year. And so it's still a very small percentage. But again, this is one of those charts showing sales with the black line representing natural gas water heaters and the blue line representing electric storage water heaters, heat pump, and resistance. And again, what you're seeing is right around this time, this movement, all of us working together on this and pushing policies and pushing awareness and getting our friends and neighbors to go electric, we're starting to see the market differences actually take hold. And we're starting to see a lot more electric being sold than natural gas, and the rebound happening after the high inflation and interest rates happening better again for the all electric rather than the natural gas. And so I'm here to tell you the good news is, in spite of some of the doom and gloom you might feel coming out of Washington, we all collectively have changed this market, and all the trends are headed in the right direction for us on the actual market activities. Um, as we lose a partner at the federal government, it'll be ever more important for states and state leadership to step up. And so the good news is we have 22 states across the country that have all set really strong goals for the sales of heat pumps. You have those in kind of the brackish green color. They're part of the U.S. Climate Alliance. They're represented up there on the screen, and they've all committed to basically double the deployment of heat pumps across the United States by 2030. And then those represented in kind of the light blue are those that are part of the Northeast Association of Air Quality Managers. All the regulators of air quality in the Northeast have put together an agreement with a number of states in their region and beyond, with states like California joining them, saying that they're basically going to phase out the sale of gas water heaters and gas space heaters by the end of the 2030s. And making a commitment to collaborate on those policies all together. And so you have really strong commitments coming from exactly the type of leadership we're going to need as we have further instability from the federal government. Um, I talked about the breakdown between the way that we regulate the expansion of the gas system and the way that we pay for gas pipes and the way that we continue to encourage the laying of new pipe in the ground, but the break between that and our climate reality and knowing that we can't keep putting fossil fuel infrastructure in the ground, and then making all of us beholden to the payments for it if we're going to be able to meet our climate targets and do so in an economically responsible way. Well, I'm here to tell you the good news is there's a number of states that have recognized this as well. And those states represented and shaded in blue have started what are called future of gas proceedings, where they are at their public utilities commissions, at their public service commissions, at their board of public utilities. They're taking this issue on head on. They're actually saying, okay, we've adopted very strong climate policies. Now, how do we use those policies to consider when a utility brings a pipe expansion project to us? What are we going to put them through to prove to us that this is only a last resort policy, that they need to prove that instead electrifying that whole neighborhood, either new or existing, or doing something else in order to avoid putting new pipe into the ground. And so all of these states, and we have about three more states that will announce they're now doing new proceedings this year as well, we're hearing, are adopting policies and procedures to basically put in place rules to try to prevent the laying of new pipe in the ground. Now, we're in a transition period. I'll end the talk talking about this strange period we're in. And so I'm not here to say that there will never be any more new pipe being laid in these states, but what they're doing is they're starting to put in place the rules and the framework in which they're going to start to lead towards the prevention of new pipe being dropped in the ground. Um, and we're seeing more policy, more laws being proposed and passed in more states than we ever have. One of the things we do with the Building Decarbonization Coalition is we track all of the state legislation on building decarbonization across the country, whether this is saying no more new installations, whether this is saying here's a new incentive program, here's the requirements for increased ventilation if you put gas in your building, your gas stoves and the like. So we track all of it. And last year we had almost 130 different bills and budget items that were on the right side of building decarbonization, trying to help with building decarbonization in more states than ever, with more passing than ever, and a number of new states as well. And so this shows us that there's increased appetite from state lawmakers to be proposing and seeking to pass, and they're learning from each other to try to pass laws on building decarbonization. But I got to be honest, um, none of this is easy in 2025. It's we're starting out with something very new, and I think a lot of times people can get frustrated by how hard all of this can be. It's like the technology's there. How can this not be easier? And the reality is, there's a lot of buildings to decarbonize in America. And we're relying upon really old, well-established sectors in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, that really they're not based around climate values. They're not focused on climate change. They're focused on making installations and moving on to the next building. And sure, they love to provide homes with safety and comfort and a good customer experience. But generally, historically, they haven't been focused on really being leaders in climate change. And so when we're pushing for trying to make sure that every time somebody buys a new heat source, when every time somebody buys a new water heater, that everything aligns in order to make that happen. Here in 2025, it can still be difficult to get the right educated customer together with the right educated installer, with the right utility and the right community, with their friends and neighbors encouraging them, and their realtor telling them it's a good idea, and their contractor. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces that we haven't aligned yet in this space in order to make it incredibly easy. So those numbers you saw are great. It's amazing, like in spite of the fact that it's so new, that the market numbers are looking so well. But the reality is that we recognize that if we're going to meet our climate targets, if we're going to decarbonize 110 million buildings between now and the middle of this century, we can't rely upon this disorganized, unmanaged approach to building decarbonization. And in fact, it may be the most expensive way that we can do building decarbonization and the most inequitable way. Because what building decarbonization done wrong will lead to is an uncontrolled death spiral of the gas industry. As more and more people exit the gas system and no longer buy gas from the gas utility has fixed costs due to the borrowing they took out to put pipe in the ground. And if they have less customers and less throughput, they need to raise rates on those remaining customers. That'll make building electrification that much more cost effective, and more people will continue to exit from the gas system, and you'll have increased rates. And so you can start to see the beginning of a downward spiral of the gas system. And who's left on the gas system in the end is those people that can't afford to get off of it, those people that don't have agency to get off of it, like renters or businesses, leased buildings, and very hard to electrify businesses where they're using gas in such a way that they have really high capital costs, and it'll be hard for them to exit the gas system. And I point to many of our restaurants in our communities as a hard to electrify sector. And normally people think of that, they think, oh, like food processing or like big industrial areas. But more and more, every time I go out to dinner now, I'm one of those guys that looks back in the kitchen and goes, oof, that's a lot of money back there that we're going to have to save some of these restaurants in our communities. And restaurants, ironically, they're some of the lowest margin businesses in our communities, but they have some of the highest energy users on a per square foot basis, restaurants. And I'm looking forward to the day where we can start to work with restaurants about figuring out programs to help them transition, rather than their trade associations fighting against building decarbonization. So the danger is we leave many vulnerable communities and vulnerable industries on a dying gas system, and they're having to pay really high amounts for it. And we're continuing to lay pipe in the ground and gold plate this energy system at the same time as they're trying to build out the electric system, whether that's for increased demand or increased security. And so it's really the most expensive way that we can be doing building decarbonization, as we're gold plating two energy systems at the same time, rather than having a managed transition, rather than acknowledging up front that we need to be winding down the gas system, and we need to be doing it in a way that's at the speed of our climate ambitions. We'll prioritize vulnerable communities first in this transition to be able to get them off the system first. And it will be one that protects the ratepayers to the greatest extent possible. So a lot of groups right now are working on what's called neighborhood scale building decarbonization, or perhaps call non-pipes alternatives or zonal electrification. And this is a process where you're taking entire neighborhoods off the gas system at the same time. One of the biggest challenges of building electrification is the education process. Generally, you replace your heater, you replace your water heater, you replace your stove when it fails. There's not a lot of people who wake up with a real hunger to make a $15,000 investment in the morning with this not needed. You do it when your system fails and you're desperate because if you're using your heater, that means it's cold outside and you want your heater back. Generally, people like showers within a few days. And so you're making a desperate emergency decision that's going to have long-term 15 to 20-year implications for you and your household and your whole neighborhood. Because until everybody agrees to get rid of all the gas appliances in a neighborhood, you cannot disconnect the gas line to that neighborhood. And so neighborhood scale decarbonization has a real benefit of doing a lot of the legwork for you. You have your utility come to you and say, we're going to be cutting off your gas to the neighborhood in the next 5 to 10 years. We, the utility, would like to pay for all the appliances, replace your four appliances within your building. We'll do all the wiring. We'll hire really good, high quality contractors. We'll provide you the education about this, and we're going to be paying for the cost of putting all of this in, and then we're going to be clipping the gas line to your neighborhood. And the way they can do this, the reason they can do this is because putting in gas pipelines is incredibly expensive. In California, it's $4 to $6 million a mile to lay new distribution pipe. In New York, it's about $6 to $10 million a mile to lay it. In Illinois, it's about $6 to $8 million a mile to lay distribution pipe. So it's incredibly expensive, and in many cases, it's actually cheaper to go ahead and use money you would have spent on pipe to go ahead and electrify a whole neighborhood, and then actually return the savings back to ratepayers instead of doing that. So you're going to be hearing a lot more about this, about neighborhood scale development. There's two major kinds. One, you rely upon air source heat pumps and you get heat pumps and induction stoves and the like put in. Or there's a type called thermal energy networks where you're basically connected to a system of water runs around a neighborhood or a community, and that provides heating, cooling for households, and it's called a thermal energy network. And so the good news is this isn't just being talked about, this is being done all over the country. There's over 100 projects that are either under construction or completed around the country. One of the things we do at our coalition is we track all of these projects. And the good news here is you have really high quality contractors that are hired by the utility to get the work done. It's free to customers. It's going to be installed well. You're able to prioritize those neighborhoods with lower income folks or folks that are facing greater environmental struggle due to what they might be living around. And it's a way to make sure that you're actually clipping off parts of the gas system rather than replacing them. So from a climate, from an equity, and from a ratepayer protection standpoint, and from a customer satisfaction standpoint, it's a much better way to do building decarbonization than a haphazard approach to all this. And it's happening. And we're seeing just a rapid expansion of laws about this. Texas and Washington just passed thermal energy network bills this year. We're expecting to see another one pass in Illinois at the end of session. So this is the most rapidly growing area of building decarbonization right now is this neighborhood electrification or neighborhood building decarbonization. And we're finally starting to see regulators step up, whether it's in Maryland, whether it's in Massachusetts, whether it's up in Washington and Oregon, or this is right out of Washington, D.C. Illinois is another great example last year. You're starting to have regulators actually stand up as part of these future gas proceedings and just say, no, we're not going to approve these large hundreds of millions of dollars pipeline replacement projects anymore and put this on the back of ratepayers. This is out of alignment with our climate values. It's out of alignment with protecting vulnerable communities. And we want alternatives. We want instead for you to be electrifying these neighborhoods as opposed to continuing to invest money into it. Um, One of the key ways that we're going to be replacing federal money that we're losing from the IRA as a result of the new administration and Congress are going to be things called clean heat standards. And clean heat standards are basically a standard, a law that you put on gas utilities in order to require them to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their delivery of gas. And so you say, all right, gas utility, in 2025, your delivery of gas produced this much greenhouse gas emissions. By 2030, we want you to get down to 75% of that. And you need to make investments within your service territory to be able to reduce your emissions by that amount. So it's called the Clean Heat Standard. It's been passed in 5 states now. We got another 4 states that we're hoping to pass it this year as well. And one of the very first ones to do it was over in Colorado. And we just had the first utility, Xcel Energy, go through the process of putting in a plan to their Public Utilities Commission about how they were going to meet their clean heat standard. They put in a plan that had a lot of natural gas from agriculture and from wood products and from landfills, a lot of pipeline replacement. The Public Utilities Commission in Colorado rejected that and instead adopted an order that provided about $440 million across Xcel's service territory in Colorado for mostly weatherization and heat pump deployment, electrification of buildings and neighborhoods across Colorado. It's a huge amount of money for a state like Colorado, dwarfs any kind of state program they've ever put out around building decarbonization or building electrification. And it starts to show the potential of a policy like this, where you're having gas utilities having to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by investing in building decarbonization and weatherization across their service territory. So you're going to hear a lot more about clean heat standards and their adoption and their use across the country. Um, and then the other big one is appliance phase outs. Your boiler or your gas furnace lasts about 20 years on average. The ones put in now, the ones put in like you know half of appliance sales in the country. And so it's only about a quarter of all the states, a little over a quarter, between a quarter and a third of all the states, but it's the right states that can actually transform the market. Because what the manufacturers don't want is they don't want a bifurcated market. They don't want in states that represent half their sales to only be heat pumps and the other states being anything. The manufacturers are very interested in just moving forward with clarity on what's to be sold in this country. And so, as we see these states adopt laws, you're going to see manufacturers and the rest of the supply chain actually go into DC and really pushing for national standards to be moving towards heat pumps moving forward. And so, I'll start to finish up here. And when we think about where we're at in this movement right now, we've had really rapid acceleration. It took a good 40 years for solar to reach cost parity with other energy sources. The lead rating system from the U.S. Green Building Council for green buildings has never been able to crack above, say, 5% of any community's buildings. It's taken a long time for electric vehicles to get to its sales point. And so watching buildings has been amazing over the past 7 years, just vaulting to a place where a quarter of Americans live in a jurisdiction that requires all electric new construction. To see the market uptake happen so fast for heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and induction stoves, and to see the reports of contractors saying they're getting more questions than ever about heat pumps, they're installing more heat pumps than ever, and they only expect those trends to continue. It's been amazing. Um, and I'm here to say the honeymoon is likely over. We're now into the tougher part of the transition. We're in what Dr. Emily Grubert calls the mid-transition period right now, where we're starting to see the wind down of the gas system as we see the wind up of building electrification at the same time. But both of these trends are not happening within a regulatory, economic, or social structure that supports either one of those by themselves, much less both of them happening at the same time. And so Dr. Grubert suggests that this moment requires really unique planning and a lot of grace and patience as well. We're at 56% market share now for the good products compared to the fossil fuel products. In order for us to be able to get to, say, 80%, 85% by the end of the decade, it's going to be almost as much work, if not more work, than the past 7 years have been. But what it's going to do is it's going to set the stage for a decade of scale. If we're able to provide the laws that provide clarity to the market about where we are going in these states, these leadership states around the country and hopefully nationally, if we're able to get neighborhood scale building decarbonization actually implemented in states across the country so that utilities can actually benefit from neighborhood scale building decarbonization. And if we're able to normalize building decarbonization so more and more people support it rather than oppose it, we're going to set ourselves up for a stage in the 2030s outside of the mid-transition that is going to see rapid acceleration. As unfortunately, we're probably going to see more climate impacts as we hit the 2030s. We'll have put in place the policies and the market structures and the consumer support to be able to finally support the increased political will that will come in that decade. And we'll be able to have just a rocket ship of deployment for building electrification in the next decade. And so this is how we see it. We see that we recognize it's hard right now, but I tell my staff it'll never be harder to decarbonize a building than it is in 2025. It's only going to get easier from here on out. And so I'll just end with with two more slides, some lessons from the election. As we lose a partner in federal government, state leadership is going to be ever more important. And so it's great to see the states stepping up, and we need to be encouraging governors and legislators to stand firm on climate change and continue to support policies like this. As we lose the Inflation Reduction Act, likely, or parts of it, we're going to need alternative sources of funding. We still are seeing funding coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. Many of the states are actually getting money from the federal government for their rebate programs for buildings. Much of the money is still coming out the door. You just wouldn't know it from all of the headlines. It's the oddest thing. But we are going to need alternative sources of funding. So things like the Clean Heat Standard and other ways to be able to generate money are going to be ever more important as we lose the opportunity for federal funding for the next few years at least. Obviously, affordability was a large part of on a lot of people's mind as they voted this year, and so we have to make sure that we're fighting to make sure that building electrification is affordable, both to purchase the equipment and to operate it. And so we need to be fighting in public utilities commissions to keep electric rates reasonable so that people can afford to electrify. Um, we've lost a lot of the blue collar workforce in the climate movement. And I think buildings represent an amazing opportunity to bring them back in. We have about a 500 million people that work in air conditioning, plumbing, electrical. And that's a lot of people that can swing a lot of elections that are already working on many of the technologies that we want them to install. What we need to do is we need to actually partner better with them to be able to make sure they're installing all the technology we want and they're pushing for policies to support them in doing it and the kind of candidates that will do that. And then lastly, we need to normalize building electrification. Your air conditioning shouldn't be something that you fight with your brother about over Thanksgiving dinner. It should just be air conditioning and heating and safe and healthy homes with good air quality. And so, yes, we should be doing building electrification for climate change, but that may not resonate with everybody. And there's great reasons to electrify your building outside of climate change. And we're going to have to do a really good job about talking about those benefits as well as climate change, so that we can make sure people are making the better choice for their homes, even if it's not about climate, but it's for other reasons as well. Robert wanted me to end with just a few thoughts about effectiveness in political forums. So, as Robert said, I've worked for about I've served on boards for three different government entities, local government entities. I worked in government for half my career. I worked for the Speaker of the State Assembly in California as his environmental consultant. And so I've watched a lot of advocacy. I've seen a lot of stuff that's worked. I've seen even more stuff that hasn't worked. And so Robert just wanted me to offer just a couple thoughts on this. And just starting at the local level. Generally, much of the decisions are made by council members, supervisors, before they get up there on the dais for the public hearing on the item. The work that people do beforehand to educate council members, to show them that there's a lot of votes in the community, there's a lot of people fired up about this topic and watching them on it. That's going to have the greater impact. It's really hard to sway decisions once somebody's already reached the dais. Nobody likes to look dumb up on the dais. They want to look like they know what they're doing, and so generally they've prepared their talking points, they prepared their position, they know where to go. And so I just always encourage folks working at the local level to just do all your work well before the item ever gets up on the agenda and everyone's climbing up on the dais. You do still have to show up at the meeting. You have to follow through on your threat to have a whole bunch of people show up at it. But you want that to be encouragement with where they're already planning on going rather than really disappointing them. The last thing I'll say about the local level is just um, there's a lot of anger right now in politics. And I'm not seeing a lot of it really working to change hearts and minds. There's lots to be angry about. But generally, bringing that anger to public testimony, taking that anger out on Nextdoor and other places. What I'm seeing over the past couple decades is a further retrenchment and a pushing away of people from the climate movement rather than bringing them in. And right now, more than ever, we need to be bringing people into the climate movement rather than rather than and pushing them away. And so I would just always encourage advocates, channel your anger. There's plenty to be angry about. There's plenty of people to be angry at. But if you actually want to accomplish your goals, we got to develop ways to channel that anger in a productive way, channel into action to be able to rally people around to force these local officials to make the right decision. Um, and The one thing I'll say about state level advocacy is, the state capitals are just like beasts inside themselves. There are whole communities of special interests. Some of the most well-financed and well-paid people in our country are working in lobbying state governments. And so it can be really hard for climate advocates to really stand out and to make a difference by themselves in state capitals. And what I always advise folks is look to build coalitions with other folks. Look to those coalitions of power that already exist within state governments, that already know all the legislators, they have relationships, they know the quarters of power and how to get things done, they know all the tricks of the trade. And whether that be consumer groups or unions, other nonprofits that are funded to be active in that area. It's going to be incredibly important if you want to make a difference at the state level to really build coalitions with organizations of power within those state capitals in order to be able to get things done. It can be very hard as an individual or as a small local organization to make a difference at the state. And so you have to work with folks that know how to get stuff done in those capitals. Um, I'm going to stop there. We can save some time for the party, maybe a couple questions, but I just want to thank you all. Hopefully, one of the messages you got from my slides and my presentation is that because of the advocacy of the last 7 years, we've actually changed the world here. We've vaulted America into a leadership position on building decarbonization through our advocacy and through our efforts. This didn't happen because of natural market forces. This happened because of the policy changes, the work with the market, and the consumer education that we all have done around this space. And it should be something that we're all really proud of. And it should be a model of what we can continue to do in this sector and what we can do in other sectors. We are winning in this sector and we're going to continue to win. We did all of this without a single penny of federal money and we can continue to do this even if we don't have a partner in federal government right now. And so I just want to thank you all for the efforts that all of you may have contributed to this amazing movement over the past few years. And I look forward to continuing through the mid-transition with all of you further. So thank you. Happy to have more of a dialogue now.
Spectacular presentation. Thank you so much, Panama. I'm just going to read one comment that somebody said. It kind of sums it up. Good presentation, and of course it disappeared. Good presentation and inspiring, so much to do. Thank you for the optimism and the model. This is so much more hopeful than I thought I would hear today. I think that comment speaks for all of us. I very much appreciate what you have done in your presentation. I have two questions for you. And the first one is the one that always comes up. What about the grid? Are we going to have enough electrical power to do all that we're going to do? I know the answer, but I'm going to see what you have to say.
Yeah, I think the biggest question right now is, how much of a bubble AI really is, how much of an impact it really is. We have plenty of capacity on the grid right now to handle building and transportation electrification. It's taking a long time to build gas power plants right now. It's about a 7-year backlog to build the gas power plants. And so what you're seeing built across America is renewable energy and batteries is what we're building. It was about 95% of all the capacity that was added last year was renewables and batteries. And you're going to keep seeing a lot of that, not necessarily just because of climate change reasons, but because that's what we can actually build in America nowadays. So we have plenty of power for this next stage of development. The question is, as we onshore manufacturing and bring plants into America, as we potentially build out data centers for AI, are we going to have the spare capacity for electrifying our transportation, our buildings, and our industry? And so we have not had real energy shortages. I say real, one's not created by market pirates, but like real energy shortages for a long time in this country. And I expect that we're going to be building a lot of energy infrastructure, but it's nothing that we're going to have to worry about for at least the next decade. We have plenty of spare capacity across the grid.
Fabulous. And the last question gets kind of down to the nitty gritty level for folks like me who have electrified or others who want to electrify. They often deal with contractors who maybe don't understand what the needs are or maybe trying to say something they're familiar with. I think, the question I'm going to ask is, how do you find the resources? Elders Climate Action has some stuff on its website. You have some really great stuff on the BDC website. But in general, how does a homeowner, say the water heater just went out, and how do they go about finding somebody who's willing to work with them?
Yeah. So it's really the most important part of this is finding a good partner as a contractor. And so when you're searching, whether that's the phone book, whether that's Google, whether that's Chat GPT, whatever you use to find your contractor, you gotta upfront find one that's skilled in putting in a heat pump or a heat pump water heater. And so your Google search has to be, heat pump water heater contractor, heat pump contractor. A lot of them on Yelp now, places like that, Thumbtack, resources like that. You can really search. You can screen for folks that do that. But if you don't have the right contractor coming, there's just going to be no end of resistance and pushback and myths, and it's can be one of the hardest parts. But once you find that person that knows what they're doing and knows what they're talking about, it's one of the most wonderful things for your home. And so up front, you have to ask, like, do you know how to install heat pumps? How long has your company been installing heat pumps? Um, we have a website called the Switches On. If you go to switcheson.org, it's focused on California, Washington, and New York right now, but it's got a whole bunch of other resources in there, including things you can use to questions you can ask a contractor. And so it's a guide for homeowners when they're trying to buy a new heating system or a new water heating system. What I'll do is I'll send it over to Robert, Leslie, and Paloma, some of these resources so that they can distribute it along with my presentation to folks. But you got to ask up front, like, do you know how to install a heat pump? Like, are you religiously opposed to heat pumps? These sorts of things
Yeah,
to
exactly.
make sure you're getting the right one.
Well, thank you so much. I thank Leslie. We're going to give you a round of applause, at least like this. Thank you so much for what you've just presented to us. I found it very highly sophisticated. Even I could understand it though. So thank you for keeping it at my level. This I want to just say plus one to what you just said about the situation with local contractors. 5 years ago, a bunch of us said we're going to do seminars on how to help contractors. Like three people showed up. And recently now things have changed so much in just the last 5 years because of efforts of folks like you. So I want to thank you so much for all you've done. There was a question in the chat. Will we get the slides? Yes. The presentation will be sent out to you as well. How do we get a hold of you, Panama, if we wanted to get in touch with you or somebody from your organization?
Yeah. We put out a monthly newsletter about everything that's happening around the country, technology, policy, consumer stuff, buildingdecarb.org. And you can sign up at the bottom of the screen for our newsletter. I'll send over that link as well. But that'd be the best way. And then there's a contact us part of the website. Or just call Robert and he'll let me know.
Yeah, yeah. Right. I'm going to take all the questions in the chat and the questions in the Q&A and try to answer some of them and run them by people like you, Panama, and get them out to everybody. Just because there's some really good questions in the chat about how do I go about doing this, that kind of thing.
Fantastic. Happy to help. Thank you all.
Thank you. Oh, Leslie wants
Well,
to say
let's
something.
hang on for 1 second. We have our action party. Our friends at Climate Action Now are on the line, and we want to pass it over to them to lead our action party. So, Liz and Kaylee, if you wouldn't
Well,
mind.
before you do that, I really want to thank Paloma and
Thank you.
Panama and Leslie and Francis and Mike Allen and the whole team of people that have been working on electrification
Thank
and
you.
Elder Climate Action for the last 5 years. Thank you all so much, and I'll turn it over to you, Ariana.
There
Let's
we
party.
go. I will actually turn it over to Kaylee and Liz. All to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. I can tell we've come in at the end of a really engaging presentation. So thanks so much for making some space and time for us to join you here at the very end. If this is your first ever climate action party with us, Kaylee and I are here with a group called Climate Action Now. We've got an app called Climate Action Now that makes it super easy to take well-researched, personalized advocacy action in the course of just a few minutes on your phone. So we are gonna hang in with you guys here for the last few minutes of this national call to get you going with a campaign that we have prepared, inspired by your theme of the event today. So I'm gonna pass it over to Kaylee for her to get you set up with how to actually take those actions using our resources. Over to you, Kaylee.
Hello, everyone. I am Director of Content at Climate Action Now. Thanks so much for having us, as always. I am going to share my screen so that you all can get into tonight's campaign. So you should be seeing a screen with a globe on the left and a QR code on the right. This is our famous goal tracker. The globe on the left will iterate as you take action, and on the right is the QR code that you're going to scan to access tonight's campaign. So feel free to get your phones or tablets, open up your camera app wherever you usually go to take pictures, and just hold that up to the QR code box on the right side of the screen under where it says current action. A little bubble that says climate action now should appear. Just tap on it. And if you already have the app, it will take you to tonight's campaign. And if you don't have it already, tapping that bubble will take you to the App Store where you can download it for free. Once you have the app, all you need to do is follow the prompts to sign up, and it will take you right to the Harnessing Collaboration for a Decarbonized Future campaign, which is the focus of tonight's talk. So if it's not working for you, don't worry. You can go to your phone browser and type in this link right here under the QR code where it says can app link /decarbonized future. I will also be dropping some links in the chat. If you don't want to bother with the app at all, you can use the Climate Action Now website to take action too. So that's another alternative. So I think that's it. Feel free to put any questions. If something's not working, just let us know in the chat.
And what we've curated here for you in this campaign is a mix of local, state, and federal actions drawn from our existing database. We've got an incredible group of volunteers who help us write those actions, including a lot of ECA members. So if anyone who's a volunteer action writer with Climate Action Now is on the call, thanks so much for your help in making sure that these actions are available for everyone tonight.
Oh, one thing I will say, so the local actions unfortunately will not be available to everyone tonight. The third-party platform that we use in order to connect people with their city councilors and mayor is only certain cities, usually big cities of a certain population size, are in that database so far. So hopefully that will change over time, but if you're not seeing local actions, that's the reason why. So sorry about that.
Yeah, we're hoping to expand that tool as we grow as an organization to make sure that anyone anywhere in the country could access their local officials automatically. But as I'm sure you guys can imagine, that's a pretty big data task to try to keep that updated over time. So for now, there's also so much to be done with reaching out to state legislators if you're not able to reach out to your local officials via the app. And definitely anything you can do and find with resources in your own local community to reach out to local officials if it's not available in the app is always a really important thing to do, especially where we're at as a country right now.
I'm about to drop something into the chat from the Elders Climate Action page. It does have a link to check in with your local elected officials, municipality, as well as county. But even that one on a national database is a little bit behind. So it's a little bit better. I would say, for a click, just check both for the Climate Action Now and also this link I've got for you here. But know that, like you said, I mean, in some states, this could be, thousands of elected officials. So they are slightly out of date. Just be aware. There might be a tiny bit of legwork when you get to the point of the city or county seats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely quite the gargantuan task to think about with all these different updates with different schedules and whatnot. And I'll also flag here that some of the links you're seeing Kaylee drop in the chat are options to take the actions on the Climate Action Now website. So if you're feeling adverse to downloading an app, you can also take those actions on our website. I will say there's a really fun feature with the Climate Action Now app where you earn points as you take action, and as you earn points, those accumulate into real trees that we plant on your behalf with a wonderful organization called Earth Lungs Reforestation. They plant trees solely for reforestation purposes, not for intended logging purposes later on in Kenya and Tanzania. So every time you take action in the app, you're helping to plant a tree. Unfortunately, right now, if you take action online, you don't get to participate in that particular element of our organization. So it's extra fun to take action on the app, but certainly welcome to take it just online as well if that is your preference. And Paloma, if you don't mind, I might just chat for a second about some upcoming events that Climate Action Now has, if that's all right with you. Awesome. So if you are a resident of New York, we've actually got an event happening tomorrow at lunchtime, and then again the next week on Thursday at lunchtime. So that event is focused on helping to pass some landmark anti-plastic waste reduction legislation that is super close to getting over the finish line in the New York legislature. It came super close last year with lots of support from Climate Action Now and everyone who participates in these events. So we're really
calling it
hoping
a lunchtime power hour. And basically the whole point is you're going to be emailing up a storm, calling up a storm, and just doing everything you can to urge people to vote yes on the packaging reduction and infrastructure. I committed to the name and I was like, yeah, I don't know this for sure. Let me get the name of the bill we're trying to get passed.
Yeah, so if you're in New York, feel free to join those events tomorrow or share with your friends who live in New York. I'll drop that into the
It is the
chat.
Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. There's the official name. There you go.
Always quite the mouthful, but gotta get all the jargon in. We've also got a couple of events for a national audience coming up. So one is we have a new series called the Monthly Dose of Climate Hope. So if you've been reading the uh, Dose of Climate Hope Substack account by Climate Action Now's editor-in-chief, this is a new live event series to complement that written Substack content. So this month's interview will be with Bill McKibben, a leading environmental activist and author. So be sure to check that out, whether you're new to Bill or a longtime fan, as I know I am. Super excited to hear from him. And then we've got a plant-based revolution action party as well later in June, where we'll hear from folks at Beyond Meat and a really interesting alternative milk company to ask them lots of questions about how healthy and how sustainable are all these new plant-based foods that we're seeing in the grocery store. So you're invited to both of those if you have any interest in those topics.
Sorry for all the links in the chat. I want to make sure we get all of our web forms in and everything in before time is up. So sorry to bombard you a little bit.
Awesome. So I don't want to keep you guys past when your call was set to end. So maybe we can wrap it up here, slightly short of our 200 action goal, but we had a little bit less time than usual. So we'll chalk it up to that and we'll definitely reach it next time. But either way, let's just, yay, like it's awesome you guys are here taking action.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a great talk. Wish I could have tuned in to listen to the whole thing, but great talk and proof that, even if these actions don't feel like they matter right now, making those connections with your elected officials really is important, and advocating for what you care about regardless of what actions they take. So
We'll make sure you get a link to the presentation. It was really good.
Oh, awesome. I appreciate that, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.